a quadruple homicide and someone is on death row for it, but is it the right person? Hello, true crimeers. This is the case of the Ziegler furniture store murders. Viewer discretion is advised. Real quick before we get started, of course, hello, my name is Mike. If you are brand new to this channel, I tell 3 true crime stories a week here on YouTube on Mondays, Wednesdays, and Fridays, but actually that's going to be probably changing to every day of the week, except for the weekends, but we'll play it by ear. So please feel free to subscribe if you're into that kind of thing. I'm also pretty known over on TikTok, I guess. I have a couple million followers over there. So if you want to follow me there, the link for that will be in the link tree in the description of this video below. The link will also pop up here at some point in the beginning and at the end of the video. So check it out if you want to. We also sell merch, shirts like this, and hoodies, stuff like that. We do ship all over this wonderful world. I can't speak today. So feel free to check that out. Also in the link tree below. And if there is a case that you would like me to cover, please just send me a quick email. Just send me the name of the individual, where it happened, when it happened. I will add it to my list. I have 5,800 names on that list, so it may be a long time before I get to it because I pick my cases at random, but I will get to it at some point, I promise. Okay, great. Anyway, oh, by the way, the email is listed below. Anyway, let's get into today's case. William Thomas Ziegler Jr. was born on July 25th, 1945. He would go by Tommy, eventually, to everyone. Later down the road, Tommy would meet a woman named Eunice, and the two of them would start dating. They would then eventually get engaged, and they would finally get married. And they lived in Winter Garden, Florida. Now, Tommy Ziegler's family owned the Zeigler furniture store, also located in Winter Garden, Florida. And at the time that this case occurs, Tommy Ziegler, who is 30 years old, is one of the owners of the store. It was around Christmas time in 1975. Eunice's parents, Perry Edwards Sr. and Virginia Edwards, they had been in town visiting for the holidays. It was the evening of Christmas Eve, 1975, when pure and utter chaos would occur. Police receive a phone call that there is essentially carnage at the Ziegler furniture store. When they arrive, police have their guns drawn because they are aware that shots have been fired inside the store, and they don't know if the gunmen or gun people, is that even a thing, are still there and they're maybe active still. But eventually they find 30-year-old Tommy Ziegler. He, I guess, had crawled out to the front of the store and he was bleeding. Tommy had a gunshot wound to the side of his lower abdomen, but he was alert and he was obviously alive. However, the same could not be said for 4 other people inside the store. Eunice Ziegler and her parents, Perry and Virginia, had all been murdered inside the store. There was also another victim, a man named Charlie Mays. He had suffered a gunshot wound as well, and he was deceased. Perry Edwards and Charlie Mays, not only had they both been shot, but it appeared that both of them had also been beaten with some kind of metal instrument. The crime scene itself was extremely bloody. It was gory. There was blood absolutely everywhere. It looked as if Perry Edwards had put up some kind of a fight, at least for some time. But there was just blood all over the floors, blood all over the walls. There were guns just everywhere on the floor. They found one of the metal instruments that was used to beat the 2 men. It was there. Eventually, they were able to determine that there were at least 30 different gunshots fired during this insane massacre. Most of the guns they found were registered to Tommy Ziegler. Essentially, Tommy had a lot of guns at his home and also at the store, and he always had one on him for protection because, you know, he is the co-owner of a furniture store. They deal with a lot of money, especially cash. And so, understandably, they have a gun for protection. What's strange, however, to police is that when they test all of the guns, there's no fingerprints on any of them. All of the guns had been wiped clean. It seemed like it would have been such a very fast-paced type of shooting where whoever did this would have tried to get out in a hurry and may not have had time to go around and just wipe clean every single gun. It seemed odd. Tommy Ziegler is rushed to a hospital and he is eventually able to pull through. He recovers, and police almost immediately say or suggest that Tommy Ziegler, the gunshot wound he got, was self-inflicted. He shot himself in the stomach because he wanted to look like a victim. How can it be that he was the only surviving victim? How were all other 4 people shot multiple times and beaten, but for some reason they left Tommy Ziegler without confirming he was dead? It seemed odd to police because Tommy Ziegler would be a witness, correct? I know that quite some time down the road later, there would be someone this analyst who had a mannequin with a replica of the gunshot wound that Tommy had, and based on the angle and based on the powder burns around the gunshot wound, it would actually be nearly impossible, for Tommy Ziegler to have pulled the trigger himself based on the physical location of the wound and the powder burns and all of that. I don't know, however, if that was presented during his original trial, because Tommy Ziegler was flat out accused by police of committing the quadruple homicide. He was arrested fairly quickly on into this, and he was charged with all of the murders. They discovered that there was a $500,000 life insurance policy that Tommy had taken out on his wife Eunice. As we all know, through our adventures of true crime storytelling and watching forensic files, life insurance policies are essentially the number one killer of people. $500,000 back at that time in 1975, that's a lot of money. A lot of money. Hell, it's a lot of money now. Shortly after the murders happened, Perry Edwards Jr., who is Eunice's brother, he comes into town because obviously his family is dead, and he tells police that he believes that Tommy Ziegler is a closet homosexual, and that he believes that Eunice had caught Tommy in bed with a dude having sex, and this caused a significant argument. And then because of that, Perry Edwards Jr. believes that that was the motive for why Tommy killed Eunice, and he had to kill their parents, Eunice's parents, because, well, they were there. And Charlie Mays was also just there. And so he was a victim of wrong place, wrong time. However, this is based solely on what Perry Edwards Jr. says. Does he have proof of this? Nope. Is there anyone else who can corroborate this story that Tommy is a closet homosexual and he got caught having sex with a man by his wife? No, there's no one else who can say that. When police arrest Tommy, he does give them his account of what happened. So Tommy and Eunice were supposed to meet Eunice's parents there at the furniture store because I guess Tommy was going to buy them some furniture piece, like a couch or a chair or something. This was going to be like their Christmas present because it's Christmas time. He then says the plan after that was he was going to meet up with one of his delivery guys, a man named Edward Williams, because they were going to do a few last minute before Christmas deliveries. According to Tommy, Ed Williams was supposed to meet Tommy at Tommy's house at 7 p.m. But then according to Tommy, he was running late to meet Edward Williams. But eventually they met up. They then got into, I guess, Edward Williams' truck and they drove to the furniture store. Tommy says that when they arrived, he got out of the truck and Edward Williams, I guess, stayed behind. Tommy says the store was pitch dark when he walked into it. And as he's walking into the darkness, he says suddenly out of nowhere, someone whacks him over the head and attacks him. He says this was so hard that his glasses slipped off and landed on the ground, which later on there is, evidence. There's a crime scene photo of that. And he said once the glasses were off, he was blind, and also it was dark, and so he could not get a good look at whoever was doing this. But Tommy was always packing, and so he took out one of his guns from his side and he fired into the darkness to see if he could hit whoever was attacking him. He says that particular gun jammed after like a shot, and so he kind of put it down, and then in the darkness he went to his office where he got another gun. This time it was a .357 Magnum, which he said he fired several rounds. Apparently he missed, according to him, because then the gun, someone had, I guess, knocked it out of his hand or grabbed it and threw it from him, and then they shoved him into a piece of furniture and he kind of fell to the ground. He says that as he was essentially blacking out, he heard one of the attackers, who again he says he did not see clearly, that they said, "We've got to dispose of Mays. He's been hit, and now we can't take him with us." Tommy then manages to, I guess, come to and then crawl to a phone where he called someone, I guess, at a Christmas party, because there were like police officers at this Christmas party that he was also supposed to be attending. And then that way, that's how he alerted police, I guess, and that's how they all got there. Well, what about Edward Williams? Because he was there, correct? By Tommy Ziegler's own account, he had drove to the furniture store with him. So where was he during all of this? Well, this Edward Williams has his story. So according to him, Edward Williams pulls up to Ziegler's house. Ziegler would end up getting there late. And when Ziegler pulled into the driveway of his home, Edward Williams says that in his car, he saw Tommy Ziegler, but also two black men that he did not recognize. Then apparently, Ziegler goes into the house. He is seen washing his hands for whatever reason. Then he goes back into the car, and then I guess comes back like 20 or something minutes later without the two gentlemen who was originally in the car with him. And then he gets into the truck with Edward Williams, who's just kind of sitting there waiting for whatever's happening here. According to Edward Williams, they arrive at the Ziegler furniture store sometime around 8:40 p.m. They park behind the store because there's a big parking lot behind it, which is, I guess, next to a motel. Williams says that Ziegler then enters the furniture store first, and he confirms that the store is pitch dark. Ed Williams begins to then walk towards the store. This is when he says that Tommy Ziegler came out of the darkness with a gun and fired the gun towards Edward Williams. But luckily, the .38 revolver he had in his hand that he was trying to shoot Edward Williams with apparently was empty. And then Ed Williams says that Tommy would go, "Oh my God, I'm so sorry. I didn't know who you were. I thought you were someone else." That was just super weird because he knew Ed Williams was there with him. That's weird. But he then hands Ed Williams a .38 and says, "Here, you hold it. That way you can trust me. That was totally an accident." Tommy Ziegler's like now trying to convince Ed Williams, "Hey, just come back into the store, so we can do these deliveries." But Ed Williams feels really weird, and so he kind of backs away as Tommy Ziegler goes back into the store. Ed Williams then he walks away. And he goes to a nearby establishment because he wants to call 911 at this point because he feels something is going on here and something is going on here. So once the authorities arrive, now after Tommy Ziegler has called 911 or got in contact with police, Ed Williams then gets back to the store to provide the gun to police that Tommy Ziegler had handed him. Well, later on, they would show that this .38 caliber weapon that was handed to him, to Ed Williams, by Tommy Ziegler, was one of the weapons that was used to shoot and kill some of these victims. You have two very kind of different, insanely different stories. The first story that Tommy Ziegler tells doesn't really mention what Edward Williams was doing when all of this happened. Edward Williams says, "Well, he tried to shoot me. That's what happened." So as police are looking into this, there is a man that comes forward to them named Felton Thomas. Felton Thomas says he knows Charlie Mays, who was one of the victims inside the store. They worked together. I guess they were fruit pickers. So Felton Thomas says that Charlie Mays had approached him that Christmas Eve day said, hey, will you get into my van with me? And we're going to go to the Ziegler store. Because apparently Charlie May said that he had arranged to pick up a piece of furniture that he had bought at the Ziegler store. And he arranged to meet Tommy Ziegler there to get the furniture loaded up into his van. So according to Felton Thomas, he and Charlie Mays arrive at the Ziegler store in the van, and Tommy Ziegler is outside and says the store is now locked. But Tommy didn't have the keys on him. He has someone coming to the store with keys to open it. So already we have these very wildly different stories. And then this is when it gets stranger. Felton Thomas says that Tommy Ziegler asks those two men, hey, while we're basically waiting, do you want to go drive to this orange grove nearby? Because Tommy Ziegler says, hey, I got these new guns. I want to fire them. I want to see how they feel. Let's go out and shoot some things. It's just some random crap at this grove. When they get there, Tommy Ziegler tells Felton Thomas and Charlie Mays, here, take these guns and shoot them. I want to see how you think they feel like when you shoot, which apparently they do. This is all very strange. And at this point, they get back into Tommy Ziegler's vehicle. They then drive it to Ziegler's house, which is when Ed Williams says he saw Ziegler with the two unidentified black men in the back. So that kind of lines up. Ziegler goes into the garage, which is also confirmed by Edward Williams. He sees him go into the garage to, I guess, get the spare key to the furniture store because whoever was supposed to meet them at the furniture store to open it was just not showing up. But he also grabs another box of ammunition. Going back to Ed Williams' story real quick, there was a point where he said that Tommy, with these two other men, when they got to the house, he did all the stuff, went into the garage, did all that. He said Tommy Ziegler left the house with the two men and left Ed Williams back at the Ziegler house. He said he'd be back in just a few minutes. And so he then leaves. As they're in the car driving back to the furniture store, Ziegler asks Charlie Mays, hey, will you now load the gun with these bullets? So they arrive at the store, and then Tommy Ziegler says to both men, all right, just follow me into the store. Felton Thomas says he feels really uncomfortable about all of this with the whole gun situation and having them fire the guns, and why is he having, Charlie load the bullets into the gun? It was all very strange. And so Felton Thomas, when they got there, he says he just walked away. And then Charlie Mays walks into the store with Tommy. Then Felton Thomas, several hours later, hears about what happened. Then he goes to police to give him this story. The police believe that this is what happened. They think that Tommy and Eunice actually got to the store somewhere around 7 to 7:30 p.m. And that's when, in the store, he shot and killed Eunice. Perry and Virginia, they were going to go to the store separately in their vehicle. They arrive sometime after all of this, and as they walk in, he shoots and kills both of them. However, there was a point in time where he didn't really get Perry Edwards Sr., and so Perry had fought back with Tommy Ziegler. A struggle happened, and that's when Tommy Ziegler was able to basically take Perry and smash his head against this metal piece of something, and then he shot and killed him. And then right after that is when Charlie and Felton arrive to do this, supposedly pick up this piece of furniture. And then they go to the Orange Grove, where Tommy Ziegler has Charlie Mays and Felton Thomas shoot a couple different guns. He then has Charlie Mays load bullets into that gun. Then they arrive back at the furniture store, where there's now already 3 dead bodies inside. Tommy Ziegler then tries to get Charlie and Felton to come in. Felton says no. As I said earlier, Charlie goes in. Then Tommy Ziegler shoots Charlie Mays. He also, at some point, probably before he shot him, he had beaten Charlie over the head with this piece of metal, whatever it was. Now, Charlie Mays, when his body was found, he had cash and receipts just shoved into his pockets. Police believe that that is what Tommy did. He planted that evidence to make it look like this was a robbery. However, he was expecting Felton Thomas to also be in the store. And so, police believe he then had a second scapegoat in mind in Ed Williams. And then we get back to kind of Ed's version of the events where Ed and Tommy find themselves back at the furniture store a little bit later that evening. Tommy fires blanks at Ed Williams. He thinks there's still bullets in the gun, but there's not. That's when Ed Williams says he feels super uncomfortable by all of this, and he books it out of there. Well, Tommy Ziegler can't be the only one left standing now without any incident, and so that's when police believe he took the gun and he shot himself and then called 911. The whole point of having Charlie Mays and Felton Thomas go to the Orange Grove was so that he could have them touching the guns and getting their fingerprints all over the guns, which these guns were also matched to what had been used in the shootings. I guess a couple different guns were used. But he was also doing that to have, powder burns show up on their hands and wrists and whatnot. But this is a problem with that theory, though, of that he had deliberately done that to get their fingerprints on the gun, because like I said at the beginning, there were no fingerprints on these guns. They had all been wiped clean. So if he was going out of his way to get them to put their fingerprints on these murder weapons, why would he get rid of that evidence? That makes absolutely no sense. One of the reasons I think that may have happened, why the fingerprints were then wiped off the guns, is because his whole plan, allegedly, was to have both Charlie Mays and Felton Thomas shot dead inside the Ziegler store, and then he could just frame them easily as the suspects because he could say, oh, I saw them, plus also their fingerprints are on the gun. But because Felton Thomas booked it, he had his fingerprints on the gun, but didn't have Felton Thomas. And then later, he hands a gun to Ed Williams. I think, obviously, this was to get his fingerprints on the gun, but he also plans to lure Ed Williams into the store and shoot him. So therefore, he would once again have fingerprints of Ed and Charlie. But because Ed also booked it, he didn't have him as a scapegoat dead inside the store. So now he only had Charlie Mays. And so my thinking is he just at that point said, fuck it. And then he just wiped the fingerprints off all of the guns because they didn't have a database back then. They'd plug into a computer. So he didn't have the people there anymore. And that's my reasoning as to why, if Tommy Ziegler did actually do this, to me, that's why he probably wiped the fingerprints off all the guns, because he didn't have the players he intended to have in that store. Does that make sense? Right? There was no gunshot residue found on Tommy's clothing, which is extremely odd if they're saying he fired all of these gunshots and it was just him. How was there no gunshot residue on his clothes? His clothing was taken in as evidence. You can even see, the bullet hole in his shirt. He had this pair of pants there was blood on all of his clothing, obviously, but there was no gunshot residue. Later, witnesses would come forward to say something about Edward Williams. He had gone to a KFC, the establishment he went to try to call 911. And the thing is that Ed Williams, since he placed himself at the scene at one point, he's surrendered his clothing to police, which those clothing items had no gunshot residue or anything like that on them. But the witnesses who saw him at the KFC said he was wearing completely different clothing than what he gave to police. Other witnesses came forward to say that around 7 p.m., maybe around 7:30-ish, they heard a very loud and quick succession of gunshots, which could not have been fired by one person. It sounded like there were multiple people firing gunshots from the direction of this furniture store. They didn't really go to police right away, though. I don't know why. Like I said earlier, there was blood found on Tommy Ziegler's clothing, which makes sense because he was shot and he was near people who were shot. But I guess he had blood under one of the armpits that was type A blood, which is all they could really do back in 1975. That was not his blood type, but it was the blood type of Perry Edwards Sr. And what police believe happened there is that he had basically placed Perry in a headlock after he was beating him, or while he was beating him. That's how he got his blood underneath into the armpit area. But they really couldn't do much with that blood evidence at that point, just because DNA testing wasn't a thing in 1975. It wasn't even close to being a thing yet. But because of like contradicting stories that weren't lining up with Tommy Ziegler's version of events, and because of this super odd behavior of him bringing those two men to the orange grove to fire the guns, and the blood evidence found under his arm, the fact that they think he was a self-inflicted gunshot wound to his abdomen, it all made sense to police, and so he would end up going to trial for the four murders. Gammy evidence of the $500,000 life insurance policy was also used against him, and the jury would then find Tommy Ziegler guilty of all 4 counts of murder. They would sentence him to life in prison without parole, but the judge overruled that and said, no, I'm giving you the death penalty. And so Tommy Ziegler was sentenced to death. And from this point moving forward, there would be an insane legal battle that lasts literally decades about getting DNA tested. The state of Florida puts up a hell of a fight to prevent Tommy Ziegler from getting all of this DNA tested. As our technology advanced, as DNA technology advanced, Tommy Ziegler was like, all right, we can test this DNA and see if it matches this or this or this. But the state of Florida, the prosecution's like, no, no, no. First of all, why not? If you are confident that, I have never understood this, not just in this case, but all cases, if you are confident that this person is guilty, why would you put up a fight to have the DNA tested? If there's DNA at a crime scene that can prove you are correct by saying this person committed the murder, why the hell would you not want to have that proof? Why would you want to just leave that unknown? That makes it boggles my mind why prosecution puts up these levels of fights about DNA. Test it. Show that you're right. And if you're wrong, oops, let's get this person out of prison. And that's basically what happened here over the course of decades. There was one point where DNA testing was approved, then that approval was reversed, and then it got approved again, and then they fought it and said, no, you can't do this. But they did have some things tested. Specifically, there was blood found on Charlie May's clothing that was not his blood. However, that blood on Charlie May's clothing matched Perry Edwards Sr. Their bodies were not close to each other when they were found. They were found far apart. There is no reason that Charlie Mays should have Perry Edwards' blood on his clothing. It doesn't make sense. They also discovered that the blood in the armpit, which had a blood type that Perry Edwards had back then, turns out it wasn't his blood because Charlie Mays also was type A, and so they found that the blood under the armpit was Charlie Mays' blood, which completely ruins their theory that Tommy Ziegler had put Perry in a headlock and beat him, that now it's Charlie Mays. But if Charlie Mays was one of the attackers that Tommy Ziegler claimed was there, that makes sense. He may have fought back and tried to fight them. But it was also complete darkness and he didn't have his glasses on. As recently as December of 2023, I believe, they have approved more DNA testing to be done from pieces of evidence at the crime scene. I think at this point, Tommy Ziegler and his team, they're paying for all of this DNA testing out of their own pockets. And from what I understand, that DNA testing is actually still going on. Tommy Ziegler says he's innocent, says that he did not do this, that he believes that Charlie Mays and possibly Felton Thomas worked together to do this. He also believes that Edward Williams may be involved, that perhaps Edward Williams was working with Felton Thomas and Charlie Mays to rob the store and get a bunch of cash. And then, oops, there were people there, and so they had to be killed. Because if you think about it, Edward Williams' placement in this story, it's odd. His involvement seems to be it's strange to me. Because there seems to be a lot of vagueness or ambiguity with what he was doing during this. There are multiple stories that say he was there at the furniture store, but was he there after the murders took place? Was he there during the murders? That's the question. They have also put out some information that Perry Edwards Jr., the son of Perry Edwards Sr., obviously, if you remember me saying very early on in this that he accused Tommy Ziegler of being a closet homosexual, and then Eunice found out, and that was the motive. That's why these murders happened. Well, Perry Edwards Jr. allegedly did not really get along great with his family, especially his parents. Perry Edwards Jr. had always been getting in and out of trouble, and then at one point, again, this is just allegedly, there was this idea that Perry Edwards Sr. was going to be taking Jr. out of the will. This could have netted Jr. like $3 to $4 million if he was still in this will. But had Eunice still been alive, they would have essentially had to split it. The odd thing, and this is a proven fact, Perry Edwards Jr., after the murders took place, he actually would end up giving the will to the courthouse, for legal reasons, instead of attending his family's funeral. And he ended up inheriting $3.3 million. And again, he would have gotten less had Eunice still been alive. The other working theory is that Tommy Ziegler was going to replace Perry Edwards Jr. in the will. That Tommy and Perry Edwards Sr. got along really well, and they liked each other, and that he was going to be part of the will instead of Junior. And so if that was the case, and Tommy knew, why the hell would he do that? Why would he kill Perry Edwards Sr. before he was able to change the will? He would have wanted to make sure it happened, because he likely would have had to sign some documents. Why the fudge would he do that? And there is actually more of a stronger motive against Perry Edwards Jr. than honestly there is against Tommy Ziegler. Because police can prove and corroborate, that's such a hard word to say for me, by the way, folks. I'm so sorry if I say it wrong. But it was easy for them to corroborate all of these issues that Junior had with Senior and Mom and Eunice. And the fact that he was immediately trying to paint Tommy Ziegler as the killer by stating this fact about him being a homosexual and Eunice finding out, where absolutely nobody else can prove that he was just pulling that out of his ass, that he was just very quickly trying to get him out of the picture because maybe he realized, oh shit, he survived. Well, he's the killer. Maybe he was planning on making him the killer anyway, but was expecting Tommy to die. The whole thing is a mess. It is. This is a very messy case. The fact that it happened in 1975 means that they didn't have, the DNA knowledge we have now, and so they probably didn't collect everything they could have collected. They probably didn't store things properly the way things should be stored. There were no fingerprints that could point to who was actually the shooter. They didn't really have physical evidence stating that Tommy Ziegler was in fact the shooter. All they had was these contradicting stories. They had bizarre behavior. They had the $500,000 life insurance policy. But Tommy and Eunice, by all accounts, had a really good marriage. They loved each other. They got along really well. There was never any signs that their marriage was crumbling or anything like that. But now we're in 2024. It's April. Tommy Ziegler, who has, by the way, had his execution stayed, I think, twice. He had his death sentence overturned. Then that overturning was then overturned back to a death sentence. He has been scheduled to be executed at least 2 times. That has not happened. And as of right now, Tommy Ziegler, I believe, is the oldest man on Florida's death row. And he has been on death row longer than anyone else in Florida. Tommy Ziegler is now pushing 80 years old, and he is sitting in a prison cell awaiting his death sentence to be carried out. He is desperately trying to get all this DNA tested, and that to me, that's another thing. Like, he is pushing for this very hard. And to me, that does say a little bit like, well, why would he want to prove that he did do it if he wasn't him? Why would he be pushing for all these tests? But also, it could just be a Hail Mary for him. If he did commit the crime, maybe the test comes back showing something different because it's such old DNA, and maybe it'll come back as showing other people's DNA that, I don't know, like maybe it could just be a Hail Mary, like I said. So I don't know. That's the end for me, is I don't know. I can see how Tommy Ziegler is guilty of this. I could also see Charlie Mays, Felton Thomas, and Ed Williams kind of working together to rob the store, and chaos ensues. This is what happens. It also could be Perry Edwards Jr., who, by the way, has since died of a heart attack. And so if he was responsible, he ain't going to be held accountable for it. And now I guess we're just here waiting to see what these new DNA tests come back as, if anything. It's such a convoluted mess, though, that if they have Tommy's DNA confirmed, he was shot, and so that makes sense. They were his guns, so that also would make sense. But you also have 4 actual murder victims and whose blood is everywhere. And so even if they like test these DNA things and say like, oh, this victim's DNA is on this piece of clothing, and then this clothing had that person's DNA, how would you know that Tommy Ziegler was still innocent? How would they even be able to confirm that he wasn't the shooter with this DNA evidence? There's so many stories about who could have done this that I don't know if it's actually ever going to clear him. And he may end up getting executed for something he may not have actually done. Or he's going to be executed for a horrific crime that he committed. It seems odd that one person was able to kill all 4 of these people this way, but it is possible. And so here at the end, I really don't know. What do you guys think? Is Tommy Ziegler guilty? Was he working with someone? Did somebody else do this and framed Tommy? Hopefully one day, the truth of what happened there at the Ziegler furniture store in Winter Garden, Florida, hopefully one day the truth of what went down that night will finally come through. But that is it for this case. True crime, a Rooney Doody Dingleberry Dongs. I hope you found it interesting. As usual, please subscribe, give this video a like, follow me over on TikTok, check out the merch store. All the links are in the link tree below. Recommend a case to me. Bada bing, bada boom, and waka waka. Who wants to hear a funny ass joke? Ha. That's from Family Guy. Anyway, my eye itches. So, yep. Well, guess I'll be hitting the old dusty trail. This is so awkward that you're still here. Listen, I gotta work in like an hour. You guys need to go. You gotta go. I gotta get to bed because I gotta work. So please leave. Please get out. Thank you. Fucking rude asses.